Welcome to Total War Pharaoh. The new expansion comes out on the 25th, and I've got a brand new early access copy courtesy of Creative Assembly. Now, the question everybody's been asking as the game's about to come out is what's up with the addition of Cavalry a few hundred years too early for when it's supposed to be there? Well, for the full explanation, you could take a look at the linked in the description video that I did. But now that the game is finally in early access, now that I've got a copy we can take a real close look at, we're going to take a look at these horses and these camels and these chariots and see just how big a deal the whole addition of cavalry thing really is. So, getting into the details here, right away the first thing we notice is that cavalry in general can be divided into three basic categories. First up, and perhaps the most forgivable, is the Sumerian cavalry. That's Sumerian with a C. We can see spelled like this on your screen here if you can read those tiny letters. These guys come from the steppelands of Eurasia, and they will come down over the Caucasus Mountains into the Near East and absolutely wreak havoc. And look at these guys. They got these horses all decorated. He's got with these little feather wings on them. They look fantastic. They're dressed like steppe peasants, which is exactly what they are. And in general, I've got to say, they look just like the inscriptions. If the art from the Assyrian Empire were to be made 3D and full color, this is, look, they've even got, see some of the horses in the art, they've got horns. And some of these horses, they've been given cute little horns on them. It's absolutely adorable. There were some with two horns. Oh no, that's a feather. There's some with two horns, but I can't, oh, here we go. Look at that. That's adorable. He's got little horns on his head. They look fantastic, these Sumerian cavalry. They are questionably anachronistic. For the region, they're certainly not here, historically, in 1200. But were they up on the steppes, looking more or less like this, up there, causing all kinds of trouble? Quite possibly. It's not quite certain when the steppe peoples started riding horses in warfare. And so, generally speaking, they look great. See those caps? They look so silly in the reliefs, but they've made them quite nice look. It's still a little silly looking, but they've done a great job making these horses look great. The Sumerians shouldn't be here in the Bronze Age collapse, but since they've included them, they have done a fantastic job with the horses. These Sumerian elite, I will say, a bit heavily armored. Is that supposed to be a metal cuirass, or is it supposed to be a cloth linothorax? It's a little bit hard to tell. Bronze helmets are fine. These sort of wicker shields are fine. And they are the elite. So if there was any of them to have armor, you'd think it'd be the elite. And that makes sense. Your mileage may vary on what you think about including them at all. But since they've included them, I think they've done a good job. Let's rush over here. The second category of cavalry isn't actually cavalry at all, but camelry. Now, these are available to the Ahlamu, to the desert nomads. So the Cetaeans will probably get them, most of those Canaanite peoples, and it's quite possible that you'll be able to recruit them fairly regularly from Babylon or the Assyrians. These guys are also about 400 years, potentially too early. They're too early to be in the region, but what were they doing down in the desert? it's hard to say that there weren't any of these guys down in the desert. Look at these camels, though. They look super dopey, but you know, real camels also look super dopey. They look perched really uncomfortably up on that hump, which makes sense because all the earliest cavalry images, they seem to be really uncomfortable up there. The one nitpick I would put in is, well, look at that guy. They probably would have had a blanket on there, not just because that's what all Arab camel riders have had, but it's just really hard to ride horses or camels without anything under your butt. You're just asking for butt rashes. Notice the position of their legs is not arbitrary. Kicking them or putting pressure with one leg or the other is how these would be controlled before they had reins and bits. And yeah, so that's a nice little detail there. They are archers, which nearly all early cavalry were archers. It would take a while before you have cavalry that can really stand the charge. Now, the third faction that gets cavalry, and this is perhaps the most questionable, are the Assyrians. Now, all Mesopotamian factions have the ability to get them. Here's some Akkadian horsemen that you can pick up as Babylon, but here are your Assyrian horse archers, and here are your Assyrian horsemen. And they look great. Look at the horses. They've got these, like, bandanas on, which is represented in the art. I say that, it's represented in the art of the Sargonid period, which is a good 500 years after the game is over. So, like everything else, horrifically anachronistic. But I will say there's one possibility, and that is that perhaps they're trying to make Ashur look a lot less like the Middle Assyrian period, which is a nice period, but not the most famous period in Assyrian history. But maybe they're trying to make them look more like the Sargonids of the Neo-Assyrian period. And let me just show you why I think that. Here are your main infantry types as the Assyrians. You've got spearmen, elite spearmen, and, more elite spearmen. Both of these spearmen, the non-elite spearmen do not have these distinctive wicker shields. These wicker shields were a key part of the Assyrian defensive strategy. Unlike nearly everyone in ancient history, if you had some archers, here's some archers, and you had some spearmen, you'd set your archers up in real history like this. Because life is not a total war game, your archers cannot shoot over a rank of people. But what the Assyrians did is they'd take these spearmen and they would go, you can't even do it, can you? You would go one rank thin, which we can't actually do. So we make them as thin as we can, then we make the archers as thin as we can. And what we see over and over in Assyrian art is the spearmen with shields guarding these archers. And it becomes a single spear and archer block. It's very powerful, and that's how they take over the whole Near East. And it's not actually in the game, because the Middle Assyrians didn't have this. And as far as we know, they weren't using this distinctive shield and defensive pattern. So maybe they're trying to go for a Neo-Assyria way too early, or maybe they're just grabbing stuff from any part of history that looks cool. Now, the one last thing we've got on this battle, on this battlefield, we're not going to start this battle, are the chariots. And the chariots look great. The chariots have been in the game since the beginning. And one thing that I would point out here, let's find the Egyptian light chariots for an example, because this is one of the most famous chariot frames of the entire late Bronze Age. Look how light that is. There's almost nothing there. These guys are very nearly naked, and indeed they've probably put a little bit too much pants on these guys for the sake of modesty. A lot of them really would have been wearing basically loincloths. You got your one chariot driver, you got your one bowman, and you've got this very nice curved yoke which acts as a shock absorber. I would give this chariot right here 9 of 10. See, they've even removed most of the spokes, which makes it a lot more fragile, but it makes it a lot lighter too. This can go very fast, but this back rail should go to the axle very nearly. There is like a whole 2 or 3 feet of unnecessary, look at that, 2 or 3 feet of unnecessary extra weight. All of that, there's your fulcrum for the lever. There's the end of that lever. That's a ton of extra weight getting put on those horses. What we find in history is that last 3 feet would just be gone. And it looks like, in the art, the charioteers are about to fall off. See, this guy, he's barely going to fit if you knock that last few feet off past that last rail. But indeed, it seems that chariots were really dangerous, which makes sense. And then the same design issue carries over into nearly all of the chariots. This chariot's too heavy. It's got way too much wood in front, and it's got, these are archers. If they're not wearing armor, then this would not have been armored. These horses would not be wearing more armor than the people riding the chariot. Let's go to some heavy chariots for an example, like these Anatolian heavy chariots. Here they did a little bit better. You can see they're wearing armor up on the chest, and then they've got sort of a wall around their legs. But in fact, they're wearing armor all the way down. Historically, their suits of armor go down past the knees, and these walls are extremely low. There would be something for them to hold on to at the front, but the chariot is not what protects the chariot rider. It's this armor on the horses, this armor on the men. And of course, the Hittite chariots were the most heavily armored. You wouldn't see this much armor on any other horse. Most egregious is, let's go over to the Babylonian chariots, or rather the Assyrian chariots here. These are very close to the war wagons of the early Bronze Age. These walls are way too high. This is a ton of weight. And in fact, look how thin that yoke is. This yoke would break frequently if there was that much weight on the chariot. Now, in Mesopotamia, the chariot riders would typically be wearing a bit less armor in the late Bronze Age, but they wouldn't compensate for that with the chariot. Anyway, that's just a bit of a rant. I'd give the art on all of this a solid 8 of 10. It looks great. There's a few anachronisms, but the real question is not how does it look? The real question is how does it fight? And this is a randomly generated enemy army with the maximum credits, and so they're all super elites, and so if I start the battle, they're going to absolutely destroy us. So let's rebuild things, and I'll see you in another battle. And so here we have the real test that we've all been waiting for. An infantry force of Canaanites, who are the people who ultimately broke the back of the chariot in the late Bronze Age, are coming up against a mostly infantry force bulked out by one unit of chariot archers and one unit of cavalry archers. And we're just going to take a look and see how they perform in the battle. Now, as we come up, the first thing we'll notice as we get into range is that the chariotry actually has a mobility advantage against the cavalry. The cavalry move faster, which makes sense. Unencumbered cavalry are always going to move faster and maneuver better. But notice that the chariots fire while moving. We can run them across this whole front line, and they're going to keep on shooting. The horses, though, they only shoot when moving, which makes sense. They're much more awkward in the saddle. It's going to be centuries of horsemanship before we get the real famous riders that can shoot while moving. But this does mean that the chariot can move and hit wherever they want a lot easier. The cavalry need to position and be very careful not to get chased down like that one poor guy did. Oh, he's just up against clubmen. He's fine. Either of them do seem to be capable, though, of the main job of chariots, which is to dance around the edge and pick off units, or to go right around the back and hit with arrows anybody who needs to be hit, any priority targets. Look at this right here. These guys have hit our line, and of course the line's not moving because historically the line would not be doing all of these weird tactical things. Let me just show you why. If you just let it, you can easily wrap this. It naturally wraps itself up, even without any commands. I mean, this is a little bit of Total War physics going on here, but it is somewhat historical. Let's hit Ursu, for example, with arrows from both the chariots and the cavalry. We'll see that the cavalry, when they're standing still, seems to have slightly better rate of fire. There are 57 of those and only 28 of these, just because you can get twice as many cavalry from a set of horses. And so overall, it looks like having cavalry is going to be a pretty minor thing in the game, which is fine. It's in the game. It's just a game. We can't get too worked up about it. On the other hand, people really do play Total War games and feel like they've got a sense of the history. And this is a pretty big section where they're not going to. This sort of cavalry charge right here, which is a staple of pretty much every Total War game, and it looks fantastic, this never happened until maybe 850 BC, if not later. Never happened in history. And people are going to come out of this thinking that it did. This sort of chariot charge never happened. But it's okay. It's still a pretty minor part. The Sumerians are a minor faction, and they are the only horse-focused ones. The Assyrians also have horses, but it's much more of an optional thing. Some people have complained they should add a toggle to remove horses, but I think it's minor enough that it doesn't really matter. And as long as people have heard that, hey, they're in the game, but they're not really in there historically, these sorts of, I don't want to call it a debunking video, but these sorts of public awareness things, that's all we really need. You can have the fun in the game as long as people learn a little bit of history for it. And that's really what these videos are about. I'm not here to rag on Creative Assembly. I got an early access pass from them, and I mean, I sit here and play this game as much as I have free time, which is not that often. But, yeah, they're doing their best, and I think we can be quite happy with the state of how cavalry actually ended up in the game. Chariots, of course, they're a bit clunky, and people complain about that, but historically, they were pretty clunky. They had a role, and you either used them in that role or you didn't. So, that's all my thoughts on here. There's going to be some more lore-heavy, deeper videos coming up here soon. So make sure you're subscribed for those. And until then, thank you for listening.